I'm Gary Null. Let's go over and say hello to our guest who is standing by, Gerald Celente. Gerald is one of today's pioneers in trend strategy. He founded the Trends Research Institute and is the publisher of the Trends Journal that's been in operation since 1980. He has since been one of the nation's most accurate diagnosticians and forecasters on domestic and international events. And you've seen him probably on RTV, PBS, BBC, read about him in The Economist, because he's here to talk as a people person. Nice to have you with us, Gerald.
Oh, it's always great being on with you. Gary, can I make a suggestion about the hydrofracking?
Yes.
Why I believe that the best way to defeat it is to have it on the ballot and let the people vote on it, and to have it as a referendum. And I'm sure if it was on the ballot and it would give the people the opportunity to vote it up or down would be the most effective way of doing it. Having worked up in Albany as the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate, I don't have any faith in the politicians at all, and particularly when we know where they get so much of their money from. So just as a suggestion, that if the coalition could work to get this on the November ballot, I believe it would be voted down, hands down.
All right, then why don't we do this? Could you set up a system that we could promote to show people exactly how we go step by getting it on the ballot as a referendum?
Well, I will definitely work on that. And if anybody out there knows how to do that as well, they could contact me at Celente at trendsresearch.com, and I guess they know how to contact you as well.
Great. Gerald, I'm going to ask you just a couple questions and listen intently as you lay out the whole context of your argument. Many of us are extremely optimistic about the future for a simple reason. I've been in touch. I've spoken with Jesse Ventura. We've spoken with Dennis Kucinich, Ralph Nader, Jill Stein of the Green Party, Rocky Anderson, Gary Johnson, and dozens of other people who really represent a populist point of view. And with only a few exceptions, there are few, mainly from Gary Johnson, where I've suggested take off the bottom section of your libertarian views, replace them with some humanitarian, conscientious, compassionate, spiritual views, and boy, you'll be really taking a leap forward. And he suggests he would consider that, but they're all looking towards the next election cycle, where they actually work together, surrendering the egos, work for a common cause, where then their individual strengths are manifest. So I'm optimistic in the next 5 years this will actually begin to take shape. On the other hand, we're faced with just the Democrat, official corporate Democrat and official corporate Republicans controlling this, the media that controls that, and the pundits that control it, as if that's the only choice we have. Take us through what you see as our options at this moment.
At this moment, my suggestion is to call a voters' strike. We don't have to vote for a lesser of two evils means that as I look at it, and I hear it all the time, people say they're going to vote for a lesser of two evils. You're being an accessory to the crime. Who would associate with an evil? And I believe that if we get 40%, if only 40% or less of the people vote, we could call this an illegitimate election, because it is. These candidates do not represent the majority of the people. They represent the special interests and narrow interests within their ideologies. So to me, I agree with you when you talk about Ventura and Johnson and the others, that in possibly to bring them together in a new movement in the next election cycle. But by that time, we could be dead. And I don't say that as hyperbole. I say it as fact. When you look at what's going on and the lunacy that is being perpetuated by both the Republicans and the Democrats, let's just take a quick look around the world. Hey, let's start a war with Syria. Oh, they shot down a Turkish airplane. Well, the Turks at first said it, yes, indeed, it was over Syrian territory. But then we heard from Hillary Clinton, our Secretary of State, calling it a brazen act, and how NATO was going to unify in their opposition against Syria. So what they're doing, they just started a war in Libya that they cannot finish because now it's being taken over by the Al-Qaeda folks. You remember them. Those are the ones that began with Jimmy Carter supporting the Mujahideen to overthrow to get the Russians out of Afghanistan, and accelerated under Reagan, and then they put in, of course, the Taliban that we're now ostensibly fighting to remove. Well, the same thing is now happening in Syria. So what we have, as I see it, are sociopaths and psychopaths that are leading us to destruction. And on a grander level, on the economic front, because morality doesn't seem to bother anyone, or immorality, but money does. So tomorrow is going to be a big day in Europe with the Eurozone voting what to do next as the leaders and policymakers, I put those words in quote, they're neither, decide what they're going to do, how they're going to steal more money from the people to give it to the banks to bail out the banks. The entire global system is collapsing. And when you follow the line, it is a perfect parallel to what's happened before. The crash of 1929, the Great Depression, currency wars, trade wars, World War. The panic of '08, the Great Recession / Depression, currency wars, they're going on. The BRIC nations right now, their currencies are collapsing. There's currency wars going on, trade wars are heating up, and now world wars. So what I'm saying is we don't have time in 5 years, as I see it as a trend forecaster. And the only solution that I could see now is, my campaign slogan is, stay home, don't vote. If enough of us stay home, we could call this an illegitimate election, and the prostitutes, the ABC, NBC, CBS, and the rest of them will not be able to spin this election in anything else other than we don't want any of the above.
Or we could vote for third-party candidates to show them our support for the future.
I don't think enough at this time will bring a sizable percentage where it will make a difference. You have to go back, or consider going back, to Ross Perot in 1992. He got 19% of the vote, and it didn't do anything, whether you were with him or against him. It needs to be a win, not an almost win. It needs to be we have to move into number 2. Oh, by the way, before I forget, something to look at, particularly those out there who can speak Italian. There's a movement going on in Italy they call the 5-Star Movement. It's being pushed by Beppe Grillo, a brilliant satirist. And they're taking over the campaign of taking over the top parties in Italy. It's a huge movement. He has millions of people following him. And it has to be, to me, at that kind of a level. Right now with John, and I've met the former governor, was it from New Mexico or Johnson? And I agree with you. Let's get away from this total libertarian movement, and let's put things in there also to help we the people. But it's too late for that. We're in July already, and we're finishing up, by the way, the Summer Trends Journal. And just a little background, Gary. I began my career running political campaigns in Westchester County. I taught at St. John's University in 1972, American Politics and Campaign Technology, one of the first courses of its kind ever taught in the nation. So I do have some background in this. And I also used to put together political action committees when they first began back in the 70s for the chemical industry. That's right. I was a different guy back then. That's why I know what I know, because I was there. I used to work for Lonza, Roman Haas, DuPont, Union Carbide. So I was on the other side. And what I'm saying is that, to me, as I see it now, the only way to win this is by not participating in it. There's no way that I can see anything happening. And the point that I wanted to make is that in all of my years of watching this, never before has there been such little enthusiasm about a presidential race as we're going into the home stretch.
Okay.
Never before.
All right, I got your point there, and I think it could work if we made it an issue, so that people were not just watching the results of the two parties, but watching the results of those who refuse to participate. And I do agree. I would not waste a vote for the lesser of two evils, and I consider them both two evils. Now let's go to some other issues in quick order here. I'm concerned that we do not have the understanding, the nuance in our society between who controls the government, the policies of those government towards the banks, meaning give back the banks the money. That when a close to $485 billion is given to Greece, that money didn't go to Greece. It went to the banks. But Greece owes it, and when it's rolled over and more money goes, it goes back to the banks again. If you went to Greece, you wouldn't see anything done with all this money, and you'd say, well, they're taking away all of our benefits. Where in the heck is all this money? The same is true now in Spain. Of $125 billion, almost $85 billion, that never reached Spain. It went to the banks and the people giving the money. Explain to us, so we understand this. There's three characters at work here. There's those insider people like Goldman Sachs manipulating with derivatives and playing this for all it can, and the vulture capitalists. There are those who want to get in there and take the assets of a country. You're weak, you're poor, you can't pay your bills, so we're going to take your best land. We're going to take your islands. We're going to exploit this and privatize it, and then you don't have any control over it. There's a third group, local politicians who are paid, bought and sold, much like ours, to go in there and vote for all this. Then you have one whole completely different, you have the people. And initially the people don't have the power until, as in Greece, they start taking it back. And then watch the Greek, I predict that the Greek people are going to revolt in the next 3 to 5 months when more austerity hits them, and they're going to throw the people that voted to continue paying out the austerity dollars back to the banks. I believe there's going to be a full-fledged revolt. I believe the same is going to happen in Spain. I think all they did was buy themselves a little bit of time, and I think the same is going to happen in Italy and finally in Ireland, not in Portugal. What are your thoughts on the likelihood of this happening in, or what do you think is going to happen in the European zone, and how will that impact the United States?
Well, first of all, I'm very disappointed in the European voters, as I am in the American voters. Spain just had an election recently, and they voted in the guy that said he was going to punish them more with more austerity. And then you look what happened over there in Ireland back in May. The same thing. They had a chance to get out, and they stayed in. And then right here in New York, we had Rangel. This guy's how many ethics violations was he brought up on? And the people voted him back in. I mean, this guy's in there for 22 terms? Did the cat ever work a day in his life? Been sucking off the public dole and stealing money, not paying taxes. And so what I'm saying is it's the people too, Gary. And they had a choice in Greece, and they voted for more pain. And then you look what's going on. Who's doing it? It's very clear. We wrote about it when it began under Bush with the TARP bailout. Our headline was Wall Street hijacks Washington. It's a complete takeover. And I'll give you an example of how egregious the crimes are. Today, the breaking news was that Barclays settled because they were manipulating interest rates. That's right. They were manipulating interest rates. Trillions and trillions of dollars worth of interest rates being manipulated by these criminals. They're criminals. And what happened? And when I talk about manipulating interest rates, everybody out there understand it affects your credit cards, it affects your car loans, it affects your mortgages, and this group of criminals were the people manipulating them. So what did they do? Oh, the Commodities Future Trading Commission, they fined them. That's right, they got a $200 million fine. You see any heads roll? Not a one. Not a one. Did you see any heads roll with the MF Global takedown by John Corzine, former governor, former senator of New Jersey, former CEO of the Goldman Sachs gang? No. Did you see anybody head roll at the Goldman Sachs gang when they were nailed for $555 million in fines? Did you see any heads roll from the J.P. Morgan criminal group? Not one. Not one. The entire system has been taken over. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's fact. The banks are controlling our lives. There was a clip that's been going on the internet from that was on CNBC, where you had these flunkies out there, these so-called experts and pundits, talking about how the central banks control our lives. It's right there for everybody to listen to. So it's the people. Until the people rise to a higher level, again, we just had an election, that disgusting rat wrangle being brought back into office. I don't know who ran against him, but none of the above would have been a good choice.
Okay, but a real quick synopsis. What do you believe will be the likely outcome of the Eurozone countries, of which there are 27, of which 17 work with the currency? What do you see the likely outcome to be over the next 2 years?
Oh, it's going to collapse at some point. This thing is only 10 years old. They put the euro coin came in 2002. It's falling apart now. How is it going to last? It can't last. But they're going to keep manipulating us and our money. And again, they're going to take us to war. They do it all the time. Look what happened when Obama took out Osama. He was down in the polls in April of 2011. Trump was railing on him. All of a sudden, we wake up. They got Osama bin Laden. The guy had been dead metaphorically or literally for several years. But Obama's poll ratings went up to over 60% up from the low 40s. They get the people's minds off the real issues by fear and hysteria. And I believe that's what's going to happen. The financial system will collapse. As it's collapsing, they will divert our attention as they always do.
All right, over now to more pressing domestic issues. I'm concerned, as many are concerned, that the National Defense Authorization Act and the Patriot Act 2, Homeland Security Act, and over 37 separate acts are not really intended to protect us from terrorist attacks, but are more to protect those in power, including corporate power, from having to be held accountable to the American public. In effect, they are challenging the American public that we better keep quiet, stay in our place, do what we're told to do, or the law will not be on our side to defend us or the Constitution. What do you see happening as far as the military-industrial spy complex, which is now $1.4 trillion a year and growing? What do you see the likely outcome as far as our freedoms and our rights in the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, this is the last 2 Trends journals we wrote about. And the cover story of the spring edition was "Next Train to Auschwitz, all aboard, kiss those calories goodbye." And that's exactly what we wrote about, is our loss of freedoms and how you don't see them being taken away from you in all at once. They keep eroding. We have none. And matter of fact, I'm sure you read and commented on the comments from Jimmy Carter. He's astounded by what's going on about our loss of rights under the National Defense Authorization Act, under the executive orders, under the new guidelines by the Justice Department that allows them to monitor anybody for any. You don't have to be guilty of anything, not suspected of anything. They can monitor everything that you do for 5 years, and they're building algorithms to determine whether or not you're a threat to the state. A threat to the state? To what state? Oh, the fascist state of America. That's right, the merger of state and corporate powers, bailing out banks, giving money to the corporate friends is called fascism. So now, Gary, they're doing this, and we've been writing about it over and over again because the financial systems are collapsing. Also, with the National Defense Authorization Act, they repealed the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, which prevented the military from taking over police duties. So what are they doing in St. Louis now? Hey, you see those military vehicles rolling down the streets?
Tanks in the streets.
Exactly,
yes.
Because they know it's collapsing, and they're going to keep it pushing us down.
Final question on this area. Most people in the United States are very frustrated, but their frustration has been misdirected from one side to the other, meaning if you listen to Mark Levin, I don't know how you can, but if you do, or Michael Savage, or many of those individuals, you think the only reason we have a problem is because we have those bad liberals or progressives or socialists or whatever they want to call. On the other side, if you listen to the left, it's all about, the Republicans and those conservatives. And I'm saying they're both wrong. And I'm saying take a look back at what it means to be a part of any of that, and you're not going to have any solutions. So the media and those people that are the dominant, loudest voices are getting a lot of attention. What do you see could help people get free from this very limited view of life if all they're doing is turning on Fox or one of the other stations and just keep propagandized nonstop?
Gary, it's about what you do, and you've been a crusader, and I learned from you about natural healing, and and it's the things that you talk about all the time. It's not about politics. It's not about money. It's about the individual. You know that wonderful Hindu saying, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. And anyone that's really ever practiced at anything knows exactly what that means. You find the right teacher and you're dedicated, that's the whole difference. When the people are ready, the leaders will appear. Look what the people look like. Look what they've become. They've lost their courage. They've lost their dignity. They've lost their respect. They've lost their integrity. And they've lost their passion. I watched that clip about that woman who was the bus monitor being harassed by those little kids and her crying, "Woo, if that was my Aunt Zidzi or any of my aunts, my mothers, may their souls rest in peace," and some little kids started talking to them like that, boy, were they unloaded on those kids. But no, they cry and they whimper. And that's all this nation is a bunch of crybabies and whimperers. Until they find the spiritual, emotional, and physical courage to rise to higher levels, nothing will change, in my estimation. As I said, look what the Fighting Irish did in May. Whew, they went down under the pressure of the government. Look what the Spanish just did. The Greeks. Look what they did. They voted in the guy who promised to punish them more. Look what the people up in Harlem just did. They voted in Wrangell again. So again, Gary, it's the things that you talk about, the holistic approach to life. Until more people do that, in my estimation, nothing is going to change.
All right, my final question for you, Gerald, is about 250 million Americans are bad to the bone when it comes to suffering. They're under a mountain of debt. Many of them are carrying the debt which cannot be unencumbered from the student loans of their children where they co-signed. Their mortgages are underwater. Their jobs have been cut back, frequently outsourced, or they've been insourced by people who are equally qualified, willing to work for half the price. And so they feel overwhelmed at this moment. What do you see happening, the likely outcome in the next couple of years, no matter what the promises on either side are, for the average American, of which there are almost two-thirds in the American population now? What do you see happening to them?
I see for most of them, unless there is a fundamental change, unless we dismantle the two corrupt parties, this is what I see for them. You and I and many of us are old enough to remember when this was a different country, when there wasn't a Staples, but there were corner stationery stores that gave the average person, the person that you're talking about, the average person, a chance to become an entrepreneur and to live a decent life. There was a time when there were hardware stores in every town. There weren't Home Depots and Lowe's. It gave the average person an opportunity. There was a time when there weren't Macy's in or malls everywhere. It was a time when we weren't chained to chains, and people, the average person, could make a living by starting their own business and becoming an entrepreneur. There was a time when they didn't outsource all our manufacturing, and you could get a job and have a decent pay as a worker in a manufacturing sector. And until those things are reestablished, and there was a time when there wasn't Bank of America and J.P. Morgan Chase and Citigroup that were Dwayne Reeds on every corner of New York City and every other major city. There was a time when those were small banks, but everything has been deregulated. This is all, it's only a replay of history. So when you go back, what's going to be the future? The future depends on what we do. Go back. They put in the Glass-Steagall Act that prevented the banks from taking over the whole system. They dismantled the Clayton Antitrust Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, and the Robertson-Patman Act that allowed the average person to get a shot at it. Until we put those laws back into place, what the average person could be to look forward to in the future is being enslaved for the rest of your life, because you're going to have to pay off that student debt, and the best thing you could do is get a job, maybe with Apple at one of their stores, as we saw that story, making $11.50 an hour, or working at Walmart's, or working at Home Depot or Staples or any of the chains. Until we break the chains, we will never be free. So that's the future. The future's in our hands. But the people have to make it happen.
Gerald, I also see that there's going to be an enormous movement of helping people get out of the cities and suburbs as they're being ghettoized and get into rural America. Sustainable communities, I believe, will be in the hundreds of thousands in the United States and around the world, working together and sharing in common ideals. I also am optimistic about that movement. It won't be for most people because they won't want to do it, but for those who do, I also see that there is a lot of positive coming there. I want to thank you, Gerald, for being on and sharing your insights with us.
Well, thank you, and I agree with you, by the way, on that.
Gerald Celente up in Rhinebeck, New York, and I'll be up there, Gerald, in about 2 weeks. I'm going to be premiering a new film up there in Woodstock.
Great.
Maybe you can come by.
Oh, I'd love to. Kingston, New York. Kingston.
Yeah. Kingston.
Yes, okay.
The Trends Journal is published 4 times a year at the website trendresearch.com.